Are we likely to get a vote of no confidence on Jacob Zuma this week, as many in the opposition parties want?
Well, that's a great question, and maybe not. If the ruling African National Congress can actually compel Jacob Zuma to resign ahead of the vote of no confidence, the opposition would not need to proceed with what they have demanded. So many actually are observing very, very closely today this conclave session, if you will, within the African National Congress, and whether President Jacob Zuma will come out of that with his job intact or not.
If the ANC does, in fact, vote to essentially depose him, does that actually compel him to leave his job?
It does not require, and that's the thing about Jacob Zuma. He's a very, very wily and very strategic politician. You don't get to be president of South Africa for 10 years and survive all this opposition that he has faced without being a very clever and very capable politician. So to your question, does he have to actually resign if the ruling ANC does ask him to? No, he does not have to. And so he will have to take a look internally. Does he have the support base, or does he have the confidence himself to withstand this internal call within the ANC and potentially face this humiliating call of no confidence within the parliament?
Mark, does he have enough allies to do that? Because if you look at the financial markets, there's a great deal of optimism here that ultimately Cyril Ramaphosa is going to be able to take over. And my understanding is, even if Zuma refuses here, Congress can be asked by the National Executive's order to vote him out of office, and then that would clear the way for Ramaphosa. Am I right?
You are correct in that the vote of no confidence could proceed within the parliament. And then it's an open question whether the ANC members of parliament will vote with the multiple opposition parties to call on the president or to compel the president to resign. But you're very much correct in that the investor community in South Africa and watching South Africa has a high degree of confidence for the presumptive president, Cyril Ramaphosa. And markets are jittery but optimistic that when that transition comes, it will improve the business environment, the socioeconomic environment in South Africa. So, but those markets are on hold. They're on pause, waiting to see the outcome of today's National Executive Committee, or in the coming days, how will the ANC resolve this very sensitive, difficult, complicated transition with a President Zuma who's clearly digging in and fearing what could come next should he resign prematurely.
Right. Yeah, and that's the key. He worries about what next and has nothing to lose to clinging on to power here. Mark, how does this play out in your view? Do you think ultimately Zuma is removed? It just, as you point out, is going to be a drawn-out process.
That's very tricky to answer. Certainly, Zuma has survived longer than many commentators and analysts and even members of the South African government have expected. He's a very, very capable survivor. But that balance of power within the ANC, not to mention the balance of power within the South African government and parliament as a whole, is shifting from being evenly split between Ramaphosa and Zuma supporters to more into the camp of Cyril Ramaphosa. And so Zuma has to be very, very careful. If he wants to survive longer, if he wants to take that risk, it could all crash down all around him. And it has been stated by Ramaphosa that Zuma has no guarantees. He has no guarantees of immunity from prosecution.
Right.
So that's exactly what Zuma and Ramaphosa are equally calculating. How far do they want to take this risk? And there are risks on both sides.
So a lot at stake here. No matter what happens with Jacob Zuma, talk about how meaningful South Africa's political trajectory is to the rest of the continent. Nigeria is the biggest economy in Africa, but South Africa is perhaps more influential. So to what extent do foreign investors view all of Africa's prospects through the prism of South Africa?
Yeah, so South Africa has been, for the longest time, the largest economy, certainly the most diversified and most developed, advanced economy in Africa. Nigeria, yes, has a larger GDP, but that fluctuates depending on, the price of oil as well as their domestic oil production, which can be impacted by its own domestic concerns, notably militancy in the Niger Delta region. But so to your question, many external observers look to South Africa to kind of set the stage for Africa's global prominence. Not all African countries accept that, and certainly many other African countries are trying to emerge from the wings and the leadership that South Africa has established over the course of many decades, when it was the only player internationally representing Africa. But the economy and the investors looking at South Africa will be reassured, at least the perceptions that they will be reassured, when the day comes that Ramaphosa will take over the leadership of South Africa. Whether that's today, this week, whether that's as late as 2019 when national elections are next scheduled to be held, there will be a breath of fresh air and hopeful confidence in the renewed leadership of the African National Congress.